everyone. So our next speaker is actually a New Jersey native. Dr. Kadeem Gilbert grew up right in Plainfield, New Jersey, um, and he went to Cornell, which happens to be, as from the previous introduction I mentioned, Cornell is where I went to school along with my wife. We went a little bit earlier than Kadeem. And he then went on to he got a bachelor's there and then went on to get a PhD from the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology at Harvard, where his dissertation was on the ecology and evolution of the tropical pitcher plants of Southeast Asia. Um, he also was spent a little bit of time at Penn State as a postdoctoral researcher, and he now has his own lab at Michigan State University. And Kadeem's work is fascinating. I think it's going to be obvious why, because he's working with carnivorous plants, and especially pitcher plants, which produce and they're fascinating plants, as you'll find out. I mean, they have these stunning red pigments. They have this weird relationship with prey. I mean, there's a lot going on with them. I'll just let him talk about them. He's going to take us on a tour of New Jersey's carnivorous and parasitic plants, from pitcher plants and sundews with their sticky tentacles to various parasitic plants that lack chlorophyll entirely. Um, and you can actually find these plants. You can find some of these plants in New Jersey, especially in our pine barrens and wetlands. In fact, strangely enough, there are some pitcher plants. I'm not sure about sundews, but pitcher plants are actually some of the only plants in this whole conference that you can actually buy in some place. I think Toadshade has them, and from time to time, Bowman's Hill has them. Um, so with that in mind, and apologies to Jeff, I know how stressful it is when technology steers you wrong. It's now we have this, but back in the old days, it used to be slide projectors jamming. So with that, let me turn. One more thing, I just want to say. Dean Gilbert is probably the only speaker at NPSNJ who has ever given a talk while accompanied by a cellist. So, and that's really cool. So anyway, I'm now going to turn us over to Dr. Kadeem Gilbert, and on you go.
Great, thanks so much for that introduction, Kazees. So I'll go ahead and share. Hopefully that works without any issue. Yes, okay, so everyone can see the PowerPoint mode. Great. So, okay, absolutely. Advanced. When I was a young kid growing up in central Jersey, in Union County, in Plainfield and North Plainfield and South Plainfield, I actually didn't really get the Garden State moniker. I was in more of an urban part, and while I was always interested in biology in my youngest ages, it was really animals that caught my attention. So I spent my time looking at birds and ants and earthworms in the backyard and reading zoo books. But it wasn't really until I got to college that I learned and realized how fascinating plants are, and not even just these weird plants, but plants in general that are all around us. So I'll start by saying in general that plants are pretty weird. So animals easily catch our attention because they move. We can easily perceive them as actors in their environment. But plants, because they're unable to move, they have to have very clever evolutionary adaptations in order to be able to survive in place and protect themselves from enemies and interact with other organisms in lots of different ways. And one common theme that we'll see, especially going into some of these weirder plants, is that they can modify their basic structures in lots of different ways. So leaves, for instance, in these photos, everything that you can see, including the spines of cacti, are derived from leaves, and plants can span from being barely bigger than the tip of a needle to being so large that a single leaf requires 10 people to carry them. But perhaps among the weirdest behaviors for a plant is being carnivorous. So the Venus flytrap is probably, if you know one carnivorous plant species, this is probably the one species that you've heard of. So the species was first described scientifically and collected by botanist John Ellis in 1768. So this is a depiction of that specimen that he collected. And I was actually fortunate to see this specimen, the actual herbarium sheet myself at the Kew Botanic Gardens a few years ago. But one thing that, so, exploring the New World at that time, and seeing this unusual plant with these unusual vice-like leaves with insects trapped inside, none of the naturalists at the time really knew what was going on, but it's hard to see this and not think this looks like a plant that is eating animals, right? It's kind of an obvious case of that. But Carl Linnaeus, the father of plant systematics, on seeing John Ellis's notes that, okay, this is probably a carnivorous plant, says, no, we can't have that. This is against the order of nature as willed by God. So it was considered to be so inconceivable, it completely flips the scala naturae. This idea that there's a natural order to things. Plants are at the bottom. They're the food for animals, and then animals are the food for humans, and so forth. So a funny thing about the discoverers of carnivorous plants. So Charles Darwin worked a lot on carnivorous plants, and this actually got him possibly more controversy than the origin of species and his groundbreaking work on evolution by natural selection. So what I have on the screen here is this poem that was published in the Gardener's Chronicle, which is actually a scathing poem making fun of Darwin for pursuing the study of carnivorous plants, saying, "What's this I hear, my Molly dare, about the new carnivora? Can little plants eat bugs and gnats, bugs and ants, and gnats and flies? Who is the wise? Who is the great discoverer? Not Darwin love, for that would prove a sort of retrograding. Surely the fare of flowers is air, or sunshine sweet, they shouldn't eat, or do aught so degrading. Alas, 'twould be sad news to me to hear your own dear Fido pet had lost his breath in cruel death because one day, in thoughtless play, he went too near a violet." So people were really making fun of the idea, but eventually Darwin publishes his book on insectivorous plants, and other researchers at the time have to admit that with the rigor of his experiments, he's really shown that something is going on here. Forsyth here saying that it's clear that the plants have a kind of household economy and turn to good account any scraps which the wheels of fortune may fling their way. But that still doesn't give the plant enough credit, because it is implying this kind of passive flinging of prey into the plants. And I can go into some of these really interesting features of attraction that these plants use to lure their prey, even in the cases where the plants themselves don't move. So carnivorous plants might be more common than you think, at least across the globe. So 800 species, not a huge amount compared to all of the species of flowering plants out there. But one really fascinating thing is that carnivorous plants have evolved multiple times, at least 10 separate independent evolutionary origins. So in an amazing example of convergent evolution, which I'll explain a little bit here. So this is an evolutionary tree, a phylogenetic tree, showing the relationships of all flowering plants. So this is at the level of order. So orders, if you remember from perhaps elementary school, kingdom, order, class, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, species. So that's a larger level of organization. So if you consider mammals, all primates, so apes, monkeys, humans, that's an order. All rodents, so rats, squirrels, beavers, capybaras, and if you consider all ungulates, so all antelopes and so forth, that's the level of order. So if we look at, for this broad view, looking at some of these evolutionary innovations, color-coded here. So in some cases, so the act of eating insects or eating animals has evolved multiple times, but plants also do that in different ways, which I'll go into when I get into some of the individual native species of New Jersey. But they also not only converge in carnivory, but converge on the same mechanism. So as you can see here, multiple times plants have evolved sticky traps in completely unrelated plant groups that are in different orders. So you can see the sticky sundew and biblis and Rurigula, Rurigula, that all have these sticky red tentacles. So imagine if a primate and rodent and an ungulate all converge on the same form and the same way of living their lives. And then you can also see this in my favorite subgroup of carnivorous plant in pitfall traps or pitcher plants, which depending on who you ask, if you consider the true pitcher plants, there are these three in yellow, green, and red, in which the trap is derived from a single leaf. So there's three origins of that. But then there are also some carnivorous bromeliads that exist in South America, which form a pitfall out of multiple leaves. So I've started with the Venus flytrap, but just to show, in case anyone doesn't know, while it is an American endemic, it's endemic to North and South Carolina. So we won't be talking about that one too much. But we actually have some, so they're famous for their fast moving traps, so we actually do have faster moving plants in New Jersey. I'll get to towards the end. So instead, we'll talk about things that we can find in New Jersey for most of the remainder of this hour. And I'll get back to these carnivorous plant genera a bit later. But preview here, as you can see in this family, Sarraceniaceae, you can see the range map and indeed includes New Jersey. And you can find in particular this one species depicted in B, actually, the Sarracenia purpurea, which I will get to and also talk about some work from my lab on that species. But yes, as said in the introduction, I'll talk not only about carnivorous plants, but parasitic plants as well. So eating insects is pretty weird, but arguably a plant eating another plant, there's something even a bit stranger than that. However, this is more common globally. So over 4,000 species of parasitic plants described to date, which is 1% of all flowering plants. And actually, this extends even beyond our flowering plants or angiosperms. There is one species of gymnosperms or conifers like pines and firs. There's one species of conifer that has evolved parasitism. So one very unusual example there. But as you can see, again, a phylogenetic tree really hammering at this point about convergent evolution in plants, which is arguably something a lot more prominent in plants and animals in terms of the number of times novel adaptations evolve in unrelated groups, really showing the flexibility of plants. So parasitic plants, like carnivorous plants, have lots of different contrivances that they use to make their living. But one thing that they all have in common is a feature called a hostorium, which is a tool that they use, as written here, to tap directly into, you could say, the lifeblood of their victims. So they have a direct, intimate connection with the vascular system of the plants that they are feeding off of. So you can think of them like plant vampires. Actually, not sure if you can see my mouse, but in this figure, we have some sectioning of the point at which the parasite connects onto the root. And really the point of this in this paper, so P is the parasite and H is the host, really the biggest point for you to see here is that at this cellular level, it's pretty hard to distinguish these tissues. You have to have a pretty trained eye. So in this case, the parasite might be a bit more stained with the blue staining, but just showing this hostorial connection. So parasitic plants, as Kadeem mentioned, in the most extreme cases, they can rely 100% on the nutrients of their host and thus lose chlorophyll, losing their green color, being entirely white. So losing the key feature that we think of as the thing that makes a plant. But there are also other cases where you do see parasitic plants which are green that only partially derive their carbon and nutrients from the host. So a lot of diversity in there, and then we'll see some examples of both hollow parasites that are colorless in New Jersey and some hemiparasites that retain some color. And I'll also mention here that you can see in C, Rafflesia, the giant flower of a carnivorous plant from Southeast Asia, possibly the most famous parasitic plant, or at least very up there, and also perhaps the most extreme, because this giant flower is the only feature of the plant that you'll see. The actual body of the plant is reduced to something almost like a fungal mycelium. And you can also see that in panel D. Those thin threads are the body of the plant inside of its grapevine plant host. So going even further, so parasitic plants tap directly into their host, but I'll make this distinction that there are some plants that tap indirectly, which are parasitic in a different way, and we have a different term for that that I'll introduce here. Jason helped me out a bit in introducing mycorrhizae if you tuned into that. But these are fungi that have these connections. Their mycelia connect to host trees, and it's a mutualistic interaction where the the plant exchanges carbon to the fungus in exchange for nitrogen and phosphorus, this two-way flow. But some plants actually subvert this beautiful mutual. So yeah, so here's our mycorrhizae, and just giving a bit of etymology. The myco is fungus and rhizae is roots. We have a different category of parasitic plants which don't form a host order. They don't tap directly into their host, but they subvert mycorrhizal relationships, and they indirectly siphon nutrients from other plants via mycorrhizae. And then we call these mycoheterotrophs. And like I mentioned, for parasitic plants, they can totally lack chlorophyll. Sometimes they can retain chlorophyll, though. So a heterotroph, an organism that eats other organisms. So fungi are normally heterotrophs, but this is an odd example of, or kind of everything today is an odd example of seeing some degree of heterotrophy in the plant kingdom. So I'll now go into some of our native parasites and mycoheterotrophs and carnivorous plant genera. So I'll have the little icon in the top right. So starting first with our botanical vampires here. And also like to point out that in each case here, I've taken a map from iNaturalist, which was also mentioned in the previous talk. But this, yeah, I really want to put in a plug for this. If you haven't heard of iNaturalist, definitely encourage you to go ahead and download it right now. You can download it onto your phone, and it's a super useful tool for recording your observations of nature, and it's also a great tool for learning. So even as a plant biologist myself, you know, I've been able to learn about groups outside of my expertise, learn about different insects through this kind of community-based platform where others can help with IDs. So here I'll just show the distribution of these different organisms. So we're starting with the genus Cuscuta, known in English as daughters. So if you ever on a walk go out and then you see something that just looks like orange silly string, just spray it all over plants. I often see these around wet places. But this is a very extreme plant parasite, and it goes along the theme in parasitic plants. A lot of times they're losing something. So if it's not chlorophyll, they might lose leaves, they might lose recognizable structures that make them plants. In this case, all we're left with is a stem, basically. They don't produce leaves. Their roots don't really remain for long. They become just this climbing, viney, twiny, stringy thing, which you might not even recognize as a separate plant until it flowers. So you can see the flowers on the left there. So, and another interesting thing about this group. So obviously they're weird. They look weird. This you could see this GIF playing over there. So this is not in real time, but it's a time lapse of a shoot of daughter in an experiment. And you could see this circumnutation, this behavior where it's kind of searching around. So the cool thing, one of the cool things about this plant is it can sniff out its victim. So they really like tomatoes, and from the study, they found out that the way that they can figure out that the tomato is there is through these volatile organic compounds, these scents that the plant is exuding. So if you put your tomato under a glass beaker, then it becomes safe, not just because it's not just the physical barrier, but the scent is blocking it from honing in on it. But the other cool thing is if you take tomato volatiles and then you put it on just an inert wooden stick. So if you just have a stick there, you might think it's a vine and it'll twine. Like vines in general do this circumnutation and then they'll start vining when they hit a surface. But if you just put like a pole, the daughter is not going to climb unless you also dip that into the tomato volatiles. So this is just a clear example of what I'm talking about these many different contrivances that plants are able to evolve, even though they can't move from place to place. They do move in a different way. So moving on to another parasitic plant here, the genus Epiphagus. And this is monotypic genus, I mean, there's only one species, the Epiphagus virginiana. And I do like etymology, so I'll start with the etymology here. Epi means above, and phagus is the genus for beech. So American beech, which happens to be probably my favorite hardwood tree to come across in a hike. I just love their smooth gray bark. But if you're out on a hike in a forest with beech, you might see something coming out of the roots, like in these photos here. And if you don't know better, you might be mistaken in thinking, okay, this plant is sprouting out, like the tree has some saplings that are sprouting from the roots. Trees do that. But no, this is actually a parasite from the family Orbancaceae. You can find them in northeast forests, but as you can see in our INAT map, you can definitely find them in New Jersey as well. They're pretty reduced. They don't make chlorophyll, but they do have carotenoids. So they have some pigments like reddish, brownish pigments, as you can see there, but not photosynthesizing. And basically, you just have a shoot with flowers. Moving on to another root parasite in the same family, Orbancaceae, is Canophilus, which is one common name is cancer root, which is apt. Also associated with hardwood trees, also fairly common. Oh, I should also note that so I'm using photos from iNaturalist users, and in the case where I'm taking a photo from a New Jersey observation in particular, I'm pointing that out in the photo. But another common name for cancer root is bear corn. And if you see the photo in the middle there, a plant in fruit, it does look a little bit like an ear of corn. And the very right, you can see kind of the withered, as they senesce, get older and wither, they form these, they just become very black and dark. So that's a phase that you can look out for them on a hike as well. And in my experience, they seem to last in an area pretty long. So, if you if you find them, you continue to hike that spot, then you can see them every year. So Phoradendron is a genus of American mistletoes. Mistletoes are actually a whole order in and of themselves. There's a whole order of parasitic plants known as mistletoes, which are hemiparasites. So often hemiparasites. So you can see in the middle photo there that those leaves are photosynthetic, but they are parasites. They tap directly into the vascular tissues of the host. Phorhodendron, the genus of American mistletoes, it's in the Americas, and as you can see from this iNaturalist map, there is one species of Phorhodendron, leucarpin, sorry, that you can find in New Jersey. Seems mostly more in southern New Jersey, arguably the weirder part of the state. So one cool fact about mistletoes generally, and so you can see the white berries of this specimen in the middle there. I'm actually not certain if the American mistletoes have as tight interactions with specific bird species, but in some cases, mistletoes have to be eaten by a particular species of bird, but in any case, more broadly, they are bird dispersed and they have very sticky seeds. Then they come out of the other end of the bird and they stick very well onto the tiniest twigs. So because of this thick mucus, they're able to just land and then germinate and begin rooting directly into that host tree. Another thing with mistletoes is that you can see in the photo on the right, they form a structure sometimes called a witch's broom. So it's obviously different looking set of leaves. All these might actually be flowers in this tree, but they can be pretty jarring in a sense. And I think on this photo to the left, if you could see my mouse in the middle there's this little round ball, and that is the mistletoe, which notably at that scale, like even already stands out from the foliage of the other trees around. And it's more striking. It'll be even more striking when all of the deciduous leaves fall off, from the trees. So in some instances, you might be mistaken in thinking that there's an evergreen tree species that you're looking at. But in fact, it's that mistletoe that's made its living siphoning off of that tree, continuing to remain green and photosynthesizing while everything else is shutting down its stores for the season. And why exactly the mistletoe became associated with Christmas, that I can't say. I think it might have to do with that evergreen nature. That's one thing that you might see out into the winter, probably in Europe where the legends originated. And here's a different genus of mistletoe, and an even weirder one. And not one that I knew about before doing research for this talk, but while we don't have observations on iNaturalist in New Jersey, according to my research, I do see records that it should be in the state. But as I'll explain, you could see why this plant might be easily overlooked. It is rare, but it is also easily overlooked. So this dwarf mistletoe species are Archithobium pusillum, pusillum meaning small in this case. You can see my mouse in the second photo. This conifer here seems to have these little branches. You might be forgiven for mistaking these as just some short shoots, but this is actually a separate plant. This is a parasitic plant. So, and you can see a bunch of them in the photo on the left. zoom in on just a few green branches coming out in the third photo. So very interesting plant that if anything, if you do recognize it as a separate organism, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's a gall or a fungus of some sort that's changing the programming of the plant architecture. So from what I can see, not much known about these. So definitely something to look out for, those of you who are in the state. And here's a very common parasitic plant. Or sorry, we're in the mycoheterotrophs now. You can see here. So very common mycoheterotrophic plant. So one of these indirect parasites, as you can see all over the place in New Jersey, but in every state that I've lived in the eastern part of the country, you can come across these in the woods. But yeah, so these are, as you can see, we have two species that occur in New Jersey. We'll start with Monotropa uniflora, the ghost pipe with this pure white, absolutely no chlorophyll, this ghostly visage popping up from the leaf litter in the forest floor. And you might be mistaken in thinking that these are the fungi themselves, as opposed to being mycoheterotrophs that are feeding off of fungi. But because they're mycoheterotrophs, you can often find them around the same mycorrhizal tree species like beech, as in looking around the roots of hardwood tree species like that. And New Jersey also has, and we don't have this one here in Michigan, Monotropa hypophytes, or at least not that I'm aware of. So pine sap, as it's called, also lacks chlorophyll, but it has these other pigments, these bright red pigments, likely anthocyanin in this case, which I'll talk a bit about. My lab's work with that in pitcher plants. But I'll note that the ghost pipe sometimes has a pinkish blush as well. You can find variants that are more or less pigmented. Okay, I'll move on. This will advance. Okay, great. So New Jersey is fortunate to have another mycoheterotrophic group, which is Coryza, which is a genus of orchids. And in a sense, all orchids are parasites, actually, in kind of a broader sense. So orchid seeds, like vanilla, if you've ever had the chance to work with vanilla bean and actually see the seeds, there are some of the tiniest seeds in the flowering plant world. They have almost no resources. So seeds normally have this endosperm, this maternal resource provision to the embryo for their germination. But orchids have almost no parental investment in the seeds. All orchids require actually a specific mycorrhizal association. There's actually a group of mycorrhizae that are specifically associated with orchids, I believe, wherever they occur globally. But in some cases, some of the orchids go a bit further and continue siphoning off those mycorrhizae after they've already germinated. So in Coryza, there's 3 species recognized in New Jersey. In the left here, you can see a green one, the sole photosynthetic species that you can find in New Jersey. But then the other 2, and I've a photo, one of those other 2, I've photos of one of the other two here, which is Carnivorous maculata, which is pretty brown, and no leaves, just this floral spike that reaches out of the leaf litter, as you often see with these. And you could probably tell, comparing to the oak leaves there, that these are really small. But look at this photo in the third image. Really beautiful flower, like we'd expect with orchids, but something that is so easily stepped over and missed. So hopefully that's just a lesson to really look down at your feet when you're hiking. Final mycoheterotroph I'll show here is Obellaria virginica, so the only species in its genus, and it's endemic to the U.S. and it can be found in New Jersey in these sites you can see on the map. It's known as pennywort, and as you can see, it's at least partially green, so it's so from what I could see, we don't know too much about this, and this is also another case. So some of these plants that I've shown already are at least threatened, if not endangered. But as you can see from the middle photo here, I say that this photo is from an obscure location in New Jersey. This is an important feature of iNaturalist, that when something is listed as endangered, it will automatically obscure the coordinates, which is really important because poaching can be a really big issue for plants, especially carnivorous plants, which I'll get to after this slide. But not much seems to be known about the pennywort. It's believed to be at least partially mycoheterotrophic, but from what I can see, there have not been empirical studies, so research studies demonstrating that. So definitely one to look out for more. And again, we can see it here next to a beech, which we know is a mycorrhizal tree. And once again, it's also low in the leaf litter. So again, showing that you should look down at your feet at a hike and also move leaf litter around if you want to see some interesting plants. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes or so, I think, we'll go to our carnivores, which I represent with this stake, though they're mostly eating insects. So we have 3 genera of carnivorous plants that we can find in New Jersey. I briefly introduced the sundews, Drosera, which was the carnivorous plant species that Darwin was most obsessed with, by the way. But there are 3 species of sundews you can find in New Jersey, and like the carnivorous plants in general, more towards the south of the state in the pine barrens. So the key thing about the evolution of carnivorous plants is that they, even more than the parasitic plants, they are restricted in the kinds of habitats that you can find them in. So the reason that they've evolved to eat insects is because they have evolved in locations where there is very little nitrogen in the soil. So instead of getting their nutrients from the soil as a proper plant normally would, they've gone to the degrading habit of consuming other organisms, animals. So we have Drosera filiformis, which has on the left, which has these long thread-like leaves, and we have rotundifolia, so round leaf, as the name says. And in the photo from my forays around Michigan, there's a mix of rotundifolia and intermedia, which rather than the round shape, has more of a spear-like shape. And yeah, so they all have these tentacles that do move very slowly, as Darwin had shown, in response to in response to nutrients from prey. So if you put pure protein, that could be enough to trigger the very slow curling to get more of those tentacles, bringing more of that glue onto the prey to keep them from moving. So I did say that I would talk about the fastest carnivorous plant that you could find in New Jersey, or really the fastest plant in general. So Utricularia, so weird for so many different reasons. So they're carnivorous, they're largely aquatic. So like Drosera, over 200 species. So these are two very speciose groups of carnivorous plants. But they're called bladderworts. They form these little bladders. And when a little water shrimp or something bumps into their trigger hairs, a little door opens inwards, forms a vacuum, sucks in the prey and the water, and closes in 5 milliseconds. That's faster than the human eye can even see. So you have to have like really high speed videography in order to look at this. But yeah, so some examples of some species people have found in New Jersey. I mentioned nutrient poor environments, so nutrient poor water is a better place to see them, but they can be pretty cryptic if you don't know what you're looking at. And as not a aquatic plant specialist myself, I could say that to me, you might mistake them for another plant until you pull them out of the water and really look for the bladders. But sometimes the only way you might be able to recognize that it's Utricularia that you're looking at is just by a tiny little flower sticking out of the water. Some are terrestrial. I have this photo in the top left corner so this is not from New Jersey. This is a photo I took in Cambodia, but you can see that tiny little flower just for a sense of scale there. But no terrestrial species in New Jersey as far as I'm aware. But you can see aquatic ones like Utricularia inflata, which has these floaties, these nice floaties. So yeah, carnivorous plants also lose things generally. In this case, this is a plant with no roots, and it's even more extreme than some parasitic plants because from what I've read, even at the earliest stages of germination, there's not even a root primordium. You just have this shoot that grows in the water, and then they can easily propagate by breaking apart and floating around. Okay, so finally, I'll close off with the pitcher plant. So my specialty here, again, you can find in the, okay, just check that. Yeah, so which you can find in the pine barrens and other bogs. So Sarracenia purpurea is the only species of this genus that you can find in New Jersey. And in fact, of the dozen or so species of Sarracenia, all but this species are restricted to the south. So Sarracenia purpurea, going along with the theme of being a weirdo within a group of weirdos, it's the only species of pitcher plant that you can find at a more northerly latitude. And you can actually find it growing from Florida all the way up to Labrador in Canada. I think possibly even Nova Scotia. So it's able to survive at a wide range of latitudes. There's variation in the color, though it's called the purple pitcher plant. You may see some that are more green. We'll get into that in the next slide. They have really interesting flowers, as you can see in that last photo. But the thing that has most interested me, if you see this photo, the third photo here from Borden State Forest, someone was able to capture this mosquito, but this is not any mosquito. And don't worry, this is actually not a bloodsucker. This is Wyomia smithii, which is an obligate associate of the purple pitcher plant. It only breeds in pitcher plants, and this is its larva up there by the map. So these larvae, that's their habitat. They swim around in the digestive juices and eat the prey that the plant has caught and the bacteria growing in there. And there's actually a whole community that lives in that aquatic microecosystem. And that's been the large focus of my work with Nepenthes and now with Sarracenia, this idea of symbiosis and how is it that these plants are, well, the thing I'm really interested in is how these, so a lot of people have studied the insects that live in those communities, but I'd argue there's a lot more work to be done understanding what role the plant plays in determining who is able to live and persist in that environment. But I'll talk about, to end, I'll talk about a couple of recently published projects on Sarracenia purpurea coming from my lab. So graduate student Sylvie Martin Eberhardt is really interested in these red pigments, anthocyanins, which I mentioned. So in carnivorous plants, you can see a lot of them happen to have these red traps, like not only the purple pitcher plant, think of the open mouth of a Venus flytrap, the red tentacles of sundews. And if you look on, online, even in blogs by people who are strong enthusiasts of carnivorous plants, you'll see repeated again and again, oh, they're red in order to attract insects. But the problem with that statement, it's been propagated without being tested vigorously, but it really bears testing because most insect prey, like ants, they lack red receptors. So it's an open question of what does that red pigment do in carnivorous plants. So a nice thing with Sarracenia purpurea is that in the wild, you can find in certain sites rare mutants where they completely lack the red pigments. So Sylvie examined the difference of fitness outcomes of the red and the green morphs, which as you can see here can grow right next to each other. And then very surprisingly, we found that the green pitchers actually do better than the red. So they catch more prey and they get eaten less by other insects. So why is it the purple pitcher plant? What maintains the existence of the red pigment? Well, one downside of being green is it's actually more attractive to their pollinators. So they're carnivorous plants, but they're also pollinated by insects, bumblebees in this case. And what this plot at the bottom shows is the visual contrast. This green mutant really stands out to the bumblebee, and then that makes a large bulk of the biomass of the prey that the green pitchers are catching. Hence, there's a balance between being red and green. And then one final project real quickly with undergraduate at the time, Dylan Wheeler, who's currently a graduate student, now with my PhD advisor, interestingly enough. We decided to ask the question, could this carnivorous plant be going vegetarian? So unlike other species in its genus, it doesn't have a lid that fully covers the pitcher. So things can fall in, including bits of leaves. It was shown in Nepenthes that one species of Nepenthes actually does get its nitrogen from leaf litter that falls in. So we see some similarities in the morphology between Sarracenia, purpurea, and Nepenthes ampullaria. So we decided to test whether this plant is capturing leaf litter and getting nutrients from that. So that was just published recently and in brief. Dylan did a lot of work over the one summer as a summer undergraduate student, sorting prey items and showing that indeed they're catching a lot of leaf litter, and then doing some experiments both in field and lab to see, does that nitrogen actually get into the plant. So unfortunately, what we find is that, well, a little disappointing in terms of the novelty, is that okay, while they do catch a lot of plant debris, and you can see that there might be a benefit to that, because when the insect catch drops, then the plant debris catch increases, but there's no significant difference whatsoever in the nitrogen enrichment, whether they're fed experimentally with leaves or with nothing. So that was just a little look into that. Yeah, so thanks everyone for your attention, and I'd be happy to ask any questions if there's time.
Well, thanks so much, Kadeem. That was really fabulous. I was very pleased to see a lot of some of my favorite weird plants of New Jersey go flying by during that. We do have a lot of questions, but we don't have tons of time to get to them. So let's see where we can go here. One of the first questions, the very first question that popped up was, are carnivorous plants only found in the New World? Now, you mentioned a bladderwort from Cambodia, so clearly not, but I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that a bit.
Sure, yeah, I can expand on that. You can find carnivorous plants on all continents except Antarctica.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. There was a question that came in from Miranda about dodder. Dodder, I'm quite familiar with how it is considered quite a nasty agricultural weed. You mentioned it loves tomatoes and some other things. And dodder certainly seemed to have quite a year, at least in my part of New Jersey. There were some large patches of it. And Miranda had a big patch break out on tall goldenrod. Apparently it's been there before. And her question is, how can she remove it or control it? My follow-up question is, should she, if it's in a natural system?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Interesting two-part question. I guess I'll start with the second part, that it is a native plant, so it has a right to exist as well. But in terms of the first question, I also don't have a very specific advice on that. I do know that there's a lot of research on parasitic plants at Penn State to try to understand them and understand how to control them as well. In brief, I'll say that it's a very difficult problem with some carnivorous plants, with some parasitic plants. They often have very small seeds, but once they've germinated, it's pretty difficult to control them. So my understanding is that people working on them, they're trying to understand how to prevent them from germinating in the first place. That's not to say that it's impossible to control them once they have, but it seems that once you see them, it might be a bit too late for that year.
Yeah, no, I saw some glorious patches of them this year, which were just practically glowing with but I may be one of an oddball group of people that really enjoy weird. Well, I certainly am one of the people that enjoy weird New Jersey plants. There was a question about beech drops and the fate of beech drops, since all our beech trees are dying of beech leaf disease. We have beech leaf disease, which is running rampant in the state and is killing beech trees left and right.
Yeah,
They don't have an alternate host, do they?
Not that I'm aware of. They're obligate, so they need the beech trees to survive. So this is an unfortunate case of what you could call co-extinction, that when one species go extinct, then that can be a cascade of everything that is specialized on relying on that plant as well. So we have to protect the beach in order to protect the beach drops.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wildlife that relies on those beech nuts too. So
Yes.
it's a bad situation to be sure. There was an interesting
Another PSA, just real quickly, that people tend to like to carve into beech trees. Don't do that. That's the way that the fungus gets in. I'm get really mad in the hikes when I see people carve their names.
Oh, for the beech bark, disease. Yeah,
people treat it like a canvas. Don't do that. That's introducing the fungus into the.
Yeah, because we've got the beech bark disease coming in, but we also have the beech leaf disease, which is a nematode coming in. It's a problem. There was an interesting observation from Colleen. So with the mosquito and the pitcher plant, would it be considered a parasite since it gets its nutrition at the expense of the pitcher plant?
Great question. So it's a very complicated relationship. Will say that yes, there is an element of parasitism. The truth is that mutualism exists on this continuum. In this case, the mosquito, we do consider it a mutualist because studies have shown that having the mosquito and then also having this midge, that they process the prey faster than the plant can by its own enzymes or by the bacterial enzymes. So they shred it into little bits, and then the plant, and then they excrete that as ammonia by their urine. So the plants actually do end up getting more nitrogen from the mosquitoes than without them. But there is also a kind of a caveat shown in Nepenthes that if the adult insect leaves the pitcher and then at least some of that nitrogen is locked up into the body of the adult insects. So they did show some parasitism in the case of those Nepenthes. But with the Waimea, those mosquitoes, we only see the adults also still hang around the pitchers. So my feeling is that it's more mutualistic than anything else.
We have 2 more questions I want to get to, see if we can get to them really quickly. One is someone who has ghost pipes that grow in their front lawn, and they used to mow them, and then they realized what was going on, and they're horrified. So they've stopped mowing them. So should they preserve them by just creating that into a garden space and stop mowing? What should they do to keep their patch of ghost pipes going? Because right now they're in the middle of a lawn.
Okay, yeah, well, definitely avoid mowing them. I will say that they're not fungi, but then they're like fungi in that the only above ground structure that you see is the reproductive part. I don't know for sure, but they might have some underground portion. It does look like that from the growth pattern, that if you cut a floral spike, that they may be able to still flower as long as you don't cut too into the underground. So I think they should be fine as long as you don't completely mow them over.
Yeah. I remember my mother yelling at me as a kid. I brought her one, and even my mother knew I shouldn't be picking those. So, and then we've got sort of a technical one here. You mentioned Urticularia purpurea. I have been doing a lot of habitat assessment this summer, including keying out Urticularia species. The point being is they're having a terrible time finding a decent dichotomous key. Do you have any great recommendations?
Okay, so unfortunately, I'm not an expert on bladderworts myself. I do have friends that know bladderworts better. So if you wanted to contact me by email, I could probably put you in touch with someone who would know better. I will briefly mention with purpurea, I forgot to mention this. That is one instance where a plant might be a little bit vegetarian. They do the spontaneous firing, and then they eat a lot of algae. And there's a paper that shows that they actually do benefit from that.
Okay, this was a fabulous presentation, and not only a bunch of great weird plants, but I don't think you terrified anyone too much about any of them, which is always a good thing. Don't be afraid to go out in the woods in New Jersey just because we have weird carnivorous plants. It's fine. That's sort of the takeaway. Yes, Kadeem?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us for Weird New Jersey Plants today. And I'm going to turn this over to Kazis, and we're